Hello guys and girls, how's it going? Screezilla here, and welcome to the top 5 worst rank 1 tanks of War Thunder. Now, I've actually asked the community for their recommendations on this one, and using some of my own opinions too. So you may not agree with it all, and if not, that's great. List your top 5 below. And let me know why you think these vehicles are not as bad as they are, or let me know why you think they are as bad as they are. Let me know what you don't like and why you don't like it. Just give me your feedback below, give me your lists, and they're all welcome. There are really no bad tanks in War Thunder. You can play any tank well, and you can have a good game in any tank, but some of them are a bit worse than others, and these are those ones that are just a bit worse than others. So enough stalling, let us start with number 5.
5.
The number 5 tank we have is the T26-4. I'm also including the SU-5 on this as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. The first tank on our list is basically a Vickers Mark E, a cheap export tank. The Soviets, who were using the old outdated T-18 mainly at the time, based on the legendary Renault FT, needed a new modern tank, and this is what they chose. In 1930, the contracts were signed for 15 of the British tanks, which were the A models, with a twin turret housing a pair of light machine guns. Think of the M2A2. We'll be getting to that in a moment. In 1932, the first domestic T-26 tanks were produced. Tanks of the 30s, they were one of the most produced tanks of the 1930s, with 10,000 built. And at the start of the Second World War, the Red Army's T-26s outnumbered the German Panzers 4-1. The standard model of the T-26 were not bad tanks. They did well, and a number of variants were made, although the early models equipped with the twin DT 7.62 machine guns were not great. The later models, with their 45mm guns and coaxial machine guns, proved extremely handy, especially in the Soviet-Japanese border conflicts in Mongolia. However, an upgraded version of this tank was made with a powerful 76.2mm gun. This was going to be used as an artillery piece, hence the designation the T-26A, or artilleriski. It used a turret similar to that of the heavy and large T-28 to house the gun and crew. The KT-28 gun was a rather reliable artillery piece. Mounted with the light tank, it would give the Red Army a fast-moving heavy gun. 6 were built in total for testing, 3 with the KT-28 and 3 with the new advanced PS3 gun. There was one problem, however. The chassis was not suitable for such a weapon. On the first test shot, the blast managed to damage the suspension, break the turret ring, and crack the roof of the turret. After these accidents in trials, the 50 tanks were swiftly cancelled because it really did overload the chassis and was no use. The T-26, it can be enjoyable, but it has a really major problem, and that's the turret rotation speed. And also it has a very low penetration gun as well. When you're actually stock, you only get the fragmentation shell and the HE shell. And right here we're going to see why this tank suffers. You just can't turn that turret fast enough, and we get outflanked. Now you may have noticed that I also had the SU-5 in the list here. And this is just here as it was built off the same chassis of the T-26. However, being open-topped, it caused less issues with a larger gun. However, in-game, it does lack ammo, and that is a real pain, and that's why it's a pretty bad vehicle. It is a pretty fun vehicle and has a very derpy long barrel 76mm, which will take out nearly any tank at any range. Even rank 2 tanks will suffer from this thing. You've got up to 100mm of penetration with the solid shot. The T-26-4, however, is less enjoyable, and falls into the bad area of tanks, gaining an extra 2 tons of weight and no extra horsepower from its 4-cylinder 80 BHP engine, the tank is a bit sluggish over the standard T26. It still has an okay speed, but it's not that great. The tank also has terrible turret armour. While the standard turret's shape offers up to 45mm of effective armour, the large, slow-moving turret of the T26-4 offers only 15mm of protection. Then you have that short 76mm gun. When stock, as I said, this tank only comes with a shrapnel round and HE round. At best, you've got 27mm of penetration, with a very slow velocity gun. After a few games, when you finally unlock the BR-350A APBC shell, with 155 grams of TNT, which is pretty decent, you may be excited, thinking your woes are over, but don't crack out the vodka just yet, comrade. The shell moves about as fast as a crippled snail, with a velocity of only 370 meters per second, making it extremely hard to aim at long range, and you will see some fast tanks able to dodge incoming shots. One bright point for the tank, however, is the HE shell. With 710 grams of TNT, it can be deadly. However, it does lack penetration with only 10mm of ability, but in skilled hands it can be deadly to lightly armoured vehicles, or if you can loop a shell onto the top of the enemy tank. It is a rewarding experience. Another okay part of the tank is the very fast reload of the round, 5 to 6 seconds. If you can get the jump on a tank, you can cause havoc, but it's pretty rare you'll have that. You'll often face down Panzer IIs and 3s, along with the 35Ts, which are extremely hard to penetrate from the front due to the low velocity of the APBC shell. It also has not great post-penetration damage. However, if you get to the side of the tanks, even a Panzer IV, you will cause devastating damage. When you start facing tanks with autocannons, however, they're going to be able to penetrate your tank pretty much everywhere, leaving a 3-man crew very vulnerable. With your slow speed and turret rotation, you are at very high risk, and this is the reason the tank is number 5. Because of that derpy gun and how deadly it is, it can be a fun vehicle, so it's not the worst, but number 5 is a suitable spot for it.
4.
And in at number 4, the Forges and Chantiers de la Méditerranée 36. The FCM-36. Now, the FCM were a renowned shipbuilding company in Toulouse. It laid the keel for many of the French fleet, from dreadnoughts to destroyers for the Mediterranean theatre. In 1935, the tank race started by Hotchkiss. The army turned to many constructors for tanks. FCM, who had helped create the Goliath FCM-2C, or Shah 2C as many know it, and working on the B1 project, the Shah B1, FCM took the gauntlet of creating a new tank once more. This time a small infantry tank. FCM, who were masters of the electro-weld, used this technology on their new medium tank, making it easy for mass production, allowing the vehicle to also be gas-proof, a desired quality after the horrors of the First World War, and the chemical weapons used over the trenches, leaving many French soldiers to have blindness or worse, death. The tank also had the new and well-tested vertical coil suspension, which gave a very smooth ride to the tank at low speeds, and the FCM-36 was great for that, with an extremely low speed, basically. One of the slowest French tanks in the game, with maximum speed of 15 miles per hour, 24 kph. The SCM-36 was almost revolutionary with its armour. The rather advanced-looking zigzag side skirts of the tank looked extremely futuristic and designed to deflect low-velocity shells. The armour was the equivalent to about 44 to 55mm of armour, making this tank extremely strong and gave the crew great protection. However, much like the British Matilda, these side skirts had a very bad habit of tunnelling mud and clogging the tank's tracks up, causing issues. Although small, the tank was actually rather roomy for the 2-man crew. It had with the engine and transmission placed out to the back of the tank, and allowed comfortable movement for its crew inside, which they kind of needed. Especially for the commander, loader, gunner, who sat behind the driver. He had all of those jobs to do, and it was a rather hard job to have, having to do everything all for yourself. Now, the APX-1 turret, the unusual pyramid turret, gave great headroom, but extremely poor vision. This was true for both the driver and the commander. The rear hatch in the tank was often left open, so the commander could sort of sit raised up and able to actually see what they were doing. But his job really started when it came to combat. The commander had to load, aim, fire both the SA-18 37mm gun and the 7.5 Mac machine gun. And this is where we get the problem starting for this tank. Having to do everything, the gunner had a lot of strain put upon them. In game, you are hurt by only having 2 crew members, as if one is killed you are automatically out of action. The tank also suffers by having an extremely weak SA-18L21 short-barreled gun. This weapon was an okay gun for the First World War, however 20 years of technology meant the gun was almost useless when it first tasted combat, especially against the 35Ts and Panzer IIs. The vehicle carried 12 HE rounds in the real world, which were completely obsolete in combat, especially against these tanks, meaning they could penetrate nothing. The enemy tank unit they had to fight, they had to go to point-blank ranges to do anything. However, the German tanks with their 20mm autocannons and 37mm cannons could do nothing against the French tanks' armour either. So both sides would drive to point-blank ranges and sometimes even have to ram each other to win the battle. In-game, we have the APCR shell of the tank, which was a very short demand in the real world. The MLE 1937 gave the short 37mm cannon the capability of penetrating up to 30mm of armour, and had a good velocity of 600 meters per second. However, due to the size of the warhead and being a solid shot, it often caused little damage to any vehicle it penetrated. Fragmentation was low. It now gets access to the MLE 1892, an APHE shell with 26mm of penetration and 15 grams of TNT, which is actually quite good if you can get through the armour. And that is a big if, because most vehicles you're facing have more armour than that. The FCM 36 sits fourth because, well, although it is slow and an awful gun, the tank does have amazing armour at rank 1 and can withstand shots from nearly any tank at its level. And although the SA-18 is very frustrating, it can be deadly. Although you'll often need multiple shots, the hand-cranked turret is a major issue too, and it's not helped by the poor speed and lack of neutral steering. However, this tank is at number 4 because of that great armour.
3.
Number 3. Now, this was a tricky one. I wanted to get a AAA vehicle in here, and I decided it was going to be the Vickers Light Tankette Mark 6A AAA vehicle. This was a tough choice. There are a few vehicles that are possibly worse. The Type 94 AAA truck, for instance, the Japanese one, is much worse anti-air vehicle with its low ammo count. However, the 20mm cannon can cause serious damage to many of the tanks. The GAZ AAA 4M has a little less penetration value and less protection. However, it is a much faster and capable of shooting all its rounds without reloading. I think it's about 4,000 rounds it has, and that's a constant barrage of bullets from the Lewis guns, and that really can cause damage to planes. The P7T AAA tractor may look silly and be a little slow, but it packs a punch and will rip apart planes with ease, and even light tanks. So why the Mark 6 Vickers? Although it can do well against planes, which is what you ask for an anti-air, it can't do anything else. The only target it can possibly kill on the ground are the open trucks with no armour. The Type 94 truck, for instance, you can ricochet off of the doors of that. It's that bad. Only having 11mm of penetration with its guns, the Beza machine guns, They fire at slightly different rates, meaning you will often be left with only one gun shooting at a plane, while the others are reloading. The small caliber 7.92 rounds also lack punch when they hit any plane with armour. Against a biplane you may have a chance, but most planes you'll struggle with. Add to that an average turret rotation speed due to it being hand cranked with a low gear and average mobility. This little anti-air is, to me, the worst we have in the game. The armour will protect your driver from rifle caliber rounds, however. Anything heavier will rip you apart. The exposed gunner and commander is a very easy target and often dies thanks to the large gap in the armour directly in front of his head. The Vickers light tank was built as a reconnaissance and scout tank for the British Army, and it was an export market. It was relatively cheap, especially the Mark VI was the most numerous tank in the British Army at the start of the war. However, it proved to be extremely weak to the Central European tanks at the time. The French campaign, there were over 400 Vickers of all variants in use, and they proved to be incapable of competing with the German light tanks at the time. With this disaster of the British Army falling back, they lost all but 6 of their tanks of the Vickers variant. The Vickers light tanks did fare better in the African theatre, however, where it had many victories over even sort of lighter armoured Italian tanks and tankettes, the AAA variant with the quad Baser 7.92 machine guns had a counterpart with a 15mm heavy Baser machine gun. This variant was only the 7.92 variant was only made for 1 year, and was soon replaced and upgraded with a more accessible turret and slightly heavier machine gun. And it was no longer hand cranked to turn. The powered turret did help quite a lot, and it turned out to be an okay AAA vehicle all in all. However, in game, this thing is beyond useless and a big joke. Having only a crew of 2 really hurts it. You're often going to die very quickly. The fact you can't even penetrate lightly armoured tanks is just frustrating, and the bullets do really lack any sort of punch when you're hitting planes. You'll often be shooting planes and just do very little damage at all. So that's why the Vickers light tank Mark VI, a AAA vehicle, is at number 3.
2.
In at number 2 we have the American M2A2. Oh, the M2A2, a bad tank that can kind of work sometimes. It's a hard tank to use, but it is not the worst by far. The M2 was a first modern light tank designed by the US, built by Rock Island Arsenal. The tank was designed for cavalry use, who were using the M1 combat cars at the time. The term combat car was used due to the Federal Court Act of 1920 forbidding the cavalry to use tanks. Very clever, America. Tweaks were made to make the tank a little taller, and the addition of VVSS suspension aided the ride of the vehicle. The vehicle used a Continental W670 air-cooled radial engine to save cost and time. This actually came as a blessing, giving the tank a great top speed of 36 miles per hour, 58 kilometers per hour. The M2A1 had a lone turret with a heavy machine gun inside and a crew of 3. However, the army wanted a twin turret, which was in vogue at the time, with many other nations around the world using it. At this stage in history, America was convinced if war was going to happen, it would be between themselves and Japan or the United Kingdom. So the design ethos was focused on these nations' vehicles. Knowing the Browning 50 cal was capable of penetrating almost all the Japanese tanks and British tanks of the era, they considered this to be a heavy enough weapon for their tank. The idea of the cavalry tank was also not to fight one-on-one with other tanks. It was there as a scout and infantry support vehicle. It needed armour strong enough to stop rifle caliber rounds, and weapons to deal with foot soldiers. So although in hindsight the idea of a 30 caliber and a 50 caliber machine gun being powerful enough was a silly notion, at the time it seemed like it was plenty. The idea of twin machine guns was to allow the tank to have a wide V arc of fire. The idea was to start either both guns from the forward or both guns pointing to the side and then meeting in the middle or meeting at the outside. The firepower was there to suppress the enemy and possibly take them down. Many thought the next war would be much like the first, where trenches and slow momentum was still a thing. The M2A2 was born with its twin turrets and was mass-produced for the US Army. Although by the time of its production, minds had changed and the vehicle was considered obsolete, 239 units were made. However, this tank, and it was the main battle tank for the US troops until 1937, the vehicle gained the name Mae West after the famous busty actress due to the view from the front of the tank. In the late 1937, 72 units were upgraded to the M2A3, which had some increased armour and a slightly longer hull. The M2A2 did not get to taste combat, but instead ended up being one of the main training tanks of the American Army. Although some of the upgraded M2A4 variants saw combat in Guadalcanal and North Africa with the British Army. So why is the M2A2 number 2? This tank has some okay speed and manoeuvrability. The 50 caliber turret is also a massive threat to most tanks at rank 1, if not from the front but from the side. However, you only have one of these heavy machine guns, so you are left just a little bit sort of harmlessly bouncing off armour with the pathetic 30 caliber rounds. This tank many people have played for the first time in War Thunder. It's their first tank, and it leaves many with PTSD. Although angled front plate can save your life with its high chance to bounce around, it will usually bounce around right into the front plate, which only has 15mm of armour, killing you anyway. The very compact 4-man crew will go down instantly if the shot is centre mass. And if you come up against the front of a Panzer II, well, just give up. The M2A2 definitely is not a good tank, but compared to the number 1, it's an Abrams. And just here, we're just seeing the M2A4, which was just such a big step up. And this tank was a brilliant tank, and it is a brilliant tank in game. It's just so much fun to play.
1.
And in at number 1, what else could it be but the I-Go-Co, the Type 87? Yes. The I-Go-Co. Now, as is common for many of the worst, our story begins with the Vickers Tank Company. You may have noticed many of these tanks are based off of Vickers tanks. It doesn't say much about the company. They were very good. They did some amazing work, but yeah, unfortunately they didn't have some good tanks at the start of the war. This time the medium Mark C. Our story begins with the Osaka Army Arsenal, who failed to make a light tank for the Imperial Army back in 1925. They shifted their design efforts to that of a medium tank, needing to be the weight of around 10 tons, and so the Type 87 98-ton tank number 2 was built. And once again, it was rejected. Not giving up on their dream to make a bad tank, the OAA pushed forward with their new tank, the Type 89, the I-Go, which roughly translates to first model. A contract was given to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, who built a purpose-built factory for this tank. Now, this tank is actually featured on my History of videos, so if you want to learn more about this tank, please go to that, and there is a bit more detail on this vehicle there. Now, the Type 89 I-Go was equipped with a mixture of welded and riveted steel plates, with some parts up to 17mm. The turret, which was hand-cranked, got equipped with the Type 90 57mm medium velocity gun, designed mainly for dealing with concrete pillboxes and fortifications. This was complemented by the heavy Type 91 6.5mm machine gun, with up to 4mm of penetration ability. Yes, 4mm, this thing is deadly. The vehicle itself was a mixture of the Vickers C and the upsized Renault FT, including a rear trench crossing bar. Although this tank does seem a little bit of a joke, it was the first mass-produced tank to have a diesel engine in the world, and commonly fitted with radios, which was still something that most tanks did not have. Early in the I-Go's life, it went to fight in China, where it ruled the land like a heavy tank. It was far superior to their tankettes and light tanks at the time, and for 2 years it ruled over the land. That was until the Chinese nation introduced new Western anti-tank weapons, which caused trouble against the tank, and they started to flee. The first time the tank met some serious tank opposition was in the Soviet-Japanese conflict. Although initially the Type 89 performed well, the Soviet 37mm and 45mm gun of the T-25 and BT tanks proved far superior, and caused the withdrawal of the Japanese tanks that remained. In the Second World War, the tanks saw yet more action. However, meeting the American M3 Stuart light tanks, the Igo Co was no match for the much faster, stronger and better American vehicles. In-game, it's a similar story. You have effectively no armour. Your low-velocity gun's APHE has very little penetration, although it contains around 130 grams of TNT, meaning if it does go through, it will cause a good amount of damage, but with only 30mm of penetration, chances are you won't go through. The new Type 3 heat round gives you over 50mm of penetration, which is enough to go through almost any tank of your rank. Even the mighty M4 Shermans are not tough enough to withstand this heat round, although it is low velocity. And being an early heat, it does not have the same great post-penetration damage punch you need. However, this is made up for by an extremely fast fire rate of around 4 to 5 seconds. The tank can be deadly in the right hands, but if they are in the hands of a new, inexperienced player, then, well, the tank is an utter dog's dinner. With the armour of a light tank, the size of a large tank, and the speed of a slow heavy tank, you really have very little going for you. And that is why I put the Igo Co Type 89 in the #1 place of the list. Now, of course, if you do not agree, let me know. Where would you have placed these tanks? And what are your top 5 worst tanks? Write them down below in the comments and let me know. And let everyone else know too. If you want to give a reason and go into detail, please do, or just keep it brief. As I said, this is my own opinion. Although I did take influence from the community by asking them on the forums and asking on channels. So I sort of got a feeling of what people did and didn't like. So I have to thank all that helped me. Basically, the main thing was basically all the low-tier Japanese tanks and all the low-tier French tanks. That was basically the list. And I didn't really want to pick on both of those nations too much, because, in all honesty, the Japanese do have some really good low-tier tanks. So do the French, kind of. There are some quite good low-tier tanks around there, but the French and Japanese are the hardest nations to play for sure, and you really, really do struggle. They're not great vehicles, but they can do the job. The Igo Co is actually one of my favourite tanks. It's a bit of a dark secret of mine, and I do really enjoy this vehicle. It's hilarious, it's stupid, it's awful, and it looks like a World War I tank, but it is amazing. And as you can see, this thing does some seriously good damage, and I don't know why. Hopefully it won't be all this laggy in the recording, but got some really weird lag spike there. The rate of fire there just saved my life, and that's the thing, is like that heat round has got some really good penetration. However, if you go up against the #2 tank in the list, the M2A2, you will suffer. So we go through the front of him, but unfortunately we don't kill his main gunner. That 50 caliber takes us out. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this list. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Please let me know down below, and if you'd like some more of these in the future, I might actually do a couple more top 5 lists. I may look at the top 5 best low tier tanks. If you have ideas for those best low tier tanks, let me know in the comments below. Alright, until next time, this is me, Screezilla, out. Bye bye!
I'm here, don't forget I'm here.
But the other thing he just did there is he did light up the rear tyres and get some heat into them. And that's really important. If you can get some heat in those rear tyres, you're just going to get slightly better drive out that restart.
Excellent.
So the pace car is coming in right now.
Excellent pickup, Carl. A little bit of heat gives you that little bit of grip because they cool off while they're just rolling around. So, alright, so pace car's peeling off.
A bit of bounce.
Away we go. Oh!
There we go.
Did Leah just run up the back of Smith then?
Yeah, actually Leah just ran up the back of Smith, just ran straight into the back, and and Smith's
just gone down.
Martin is going around. Jason Martin's gone around. Jason Martin has gone around into the back.
And it's
Big,
scored.
huge crash.
Massive
Oh,
accident.
massive